Hello everybody, welcome back to From Rhythm to Algorithm. We continue on with our derivation. What does sensorality stabilize? And so, again, looking for that is the right question, but it might seem like we're being really specific with what questions we're asking. I'm just showing you the development of logic. Again, all of this demonstration is contained within the shapes of the letters themselves. And so our question is, what does sensorality stabilize? If you're actually following the derivation, right, we said what is sensorality a bunch of times. Again, I'm just trying to show you every step of realization, but it doesn't really matter. The final result, language is literal, it speaks for itself. But we continue on with our derivation. First thing I wanted to say is one of the previous episodes, probably in the last 4 or 5, probably should have said something more specifically, but something came up where I say, when we're talking about dispensality and dispersality, and we went from dispersion to dispensation, right? A state of disorder to a state of order. And then you might raise your hand if you're actually following anything, but Brad, the start of the universe or the Big Bang was a period or a state of extreme limitation of entropy, right? It was highly ordered. There was no disorder. So why did you say that and that? Then put that on the screen, right? Well, again, if you see on the screen, I put the universal phase changes, right? We have these counting systems, 1, 2, many. This state of highly orderedness that is now diffusing or stabilizing or contracting is what I've called R3, but where we have a 1, 2, many counting system, disorder, then up to a state of complete order, and then you stabilize new internal property, and then every action or motion creates disorder. On the universal phase changes, again, there's no motion yet from R1, but point being is you go from disorder to order, and then all measurement comes from the stabilization of R2. And so you can't really have, because of this dichotomy and bounding of logic, the question, why is there something rather than nothing doesn't actually make sense. But you go from disorder to a state of order, and then it expands, and then the last universal stabilized phase change was 2. And that's why if you go look at any tribe in the jungle, they have a 1, 2, many stable or counting system. The 1 and the 2 are stabilized universal phase changes. And so I put it on the screen, just thought I'd put some more context again, but we've covered that as much as literally logically possible. And so continuing on, viscerality is stimulation. Stimulation is visceral. What is viscerality to viscosity? I think we've said it, I'm not sure if we did, but the inverse of viscosity is velocity, right? Velocity is movement, the change of position over a given amount of time. Viscosity is the resistance to flow. Flow is a word for movement. It is the resistance to movement. And so we have this thing that exists, movement, change, all dynamic is moving. And then we have the inverse of that, right? We have this process, the chronology of differentiation. Existence, to differentiate, it inverts, and that inversion stabilizes the limit or the extremity, the extreme being opposition. But you have something that exists and then you say not that. So something exists, you invert that, and then you get the inverse. So you have velocity, then viscosity. Viscosity is the inverse of velocity. Velocity is to energy what viscosity is to entropy. Probably should have said it the other way. Again, energy is to velocity what entropy is to viscosity. But again, you see the concepts we are relating, right? Energy, the capacity, energy, movement, potential, velocity, the movement, entropy, the inverse of energy, viscosity, the resistance to movement. And so if you have resistance to movement, you have dissipation, you have loss of energy, you have entropy, right? Energy has no potential for movement. And so that is very clear, because again, we said energy is the inverse of entropy, and then infinitesimality is the inverse of infinity, which that one's like purely, not purely, but I mean, that's a lot more logical. And I don't even know if I said explicitly, but viscosity is the inverse to velocity. And then again, we get this natural, language is literal, right? I just have the fundamental theorem of logic. Inversality is internal. right? Viscosity, right? The forms of the words, what is changing is the syllability internal to those bounds, right? Viscosity starts with a V, ends with a TY. Velocity starts with a V, ends in a TY. And so we just have this internal churning of letters for literal inversion, linguistically. Same thing with energy. Both start with an EN. Again, you can see the form of the words, but that is linguistic inversion. That is how it manifests with the words. What is resistance to negation? And so I also have, again, I just restated the fundamental theorem of logic. I'll just put one up there. It doesn't really matter, but again, I'm just trying to show you my personal progression. It just happens really quick. But inversion produces negation, right? We have velocity, things are moving. That's probably the most fundamental things. Everything is dynamic, everything is in motion. And if you try to limit that motion, you get vibration. And that is literally how I'm communicating with you right now. But when you invert something, you have something that exists and then you invert it, and that it's its negation, right? We have, right, what is energy? Well, or what is entropy? Well, it's not energy, right? But it's the same thing. It represents the same idea. It's this dichotomy that is stabilized physically, and that dichotomy is present logically. Energy, entropy, velocity, viscosity. And so inversion produces negation, inversality is internal. And I had those as labeled the fundamental theorems of logic. What is resistance to negation? Again, negation proportional. Again, posing the question, if there's nothing more to say, there's nothing more to say. Entropy is not movement. Entropy is no potential movement, right? Energy, movement, potential, entropy, not that. And so we just put this negating thing in there because we're calculating a physical definition. What is sensorality? It's censorship, but what is it rigorously? What is its unique pairing, so on and so forth? What is potential to resistance? Again, resistance limits potential. Morality is the capacity to do what is right. So remember I said we had memorality as, these aren't things I pick out. They just naturally develop. Memorality, memory plus morality, memory, remembering things, morality, knowing what is to do, knowing what is right. Now we're making morality the capacity to do what is right. And so, for example, all of the people that are aware of my work that won't respect the law or tell the truth, that is not moral. But sensorality is moral. Oration, moral, right? Morality is oral, analysis is anal. Yep, that's going to go on a t-shirt or something. But sensorality is anal, right? Anal retentive. They're very stringent. They're very strict. They're very OCD. They want it in a certain way. Sensorality is anal. Sensorality is anality. Anal with an ITY. How does socialization affect sensorization, right? Do you censor more things the more you socialize? Posing the question, again, we're going to arrive at a natural definition. Sensorality is sensorizationality. Sensorality differentiates speciality, right? So now again, think about that. Speciality, natural tendency to differentiate for sexual antagonism. And so sensorality differentiates differentiation. So again, we're arriving at this faux pas, this false negative. What is the theme of mathematics? Mathematics is literally thematics. That demonstration is what we're trying to arrive at. Energy is movement potential. Does information have the ability to move, right? Information, when I learn something, when I download something on my phone, it's alignment, it's resonance. Like I don't get more massive by learning something. I have literally like synchronizing atoms in your brain. I mean, that's what learning is at an atomic level. And so does information have the ability to move? Again, information is the most general word for energy. Energy is the most, like, mass, charge, mass, energy, information, right? Mass is information. Again, the point is not to answer these questions. The point is to pose a logical statement that elicits your intuition, your conceptualization. Sensorality is, because that question directly produces the definition, right? Does information have the ability to move? Sensorality is movability, right? The ability to move is sensorous. when you're on a roller coaster and you're going, oh, I'm having a great time, woo. Dispense, despise. Sensorality despises. Despising, resents. Again, look at the word resent. Resent. And it's just associated to mean extreme not liking, right? Oration, ovation. Sensorality is ovationality. And you might be saying, Brad, orality has been the base of sensorality the entire time. Correct, but we're proving things linguistically. And we're just showing this demonstration. Sensorality is ovationality. Sensorality is vationality. Power is energy velocity. Energy is generosity. Sensorality is generosity velocity. And so again, might sound corny, but we're just, again, taking one step after the next linguistically to the point where, again, we're effectively demonstrating the consistency in this completeness so completely, I can't say any other words, that you kind of like answer, the proofs are just self-contained because there's no other words that could exist to describe something. So if you just build out the entirety of language, of the literal words, then you just have to you pair the words to the process. You don't like pick what thing you're describing. But it has to be right, effectively. Granted, again, I've never met a single person that even has like the beginning foundations to be able to do this analysis process, because again, all of the things I'm proving, I've iterated on a personal level hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of times. And so it really is just brute force logical exhaustion, because demonstrating the way language works, you kind of have to know how it all works, but again, it's a derivation. It's a process. It's way too much. I don't know, man. I just have never met somebody that is even remotely possible to begin this analysis process. But that is what I have for you today. Thank you for watching. See you on the next one.